Monday was spent on exercise and relaxation. Early in the morning, I went jogging and made my way over to the less visited southwest coastal area of the island. I met a few early risers walking the crushed coral-covered trail leading along the beach, but soon left them behind. When I arrived at my destination, a small rock-lined cove at the extreme western tip of the island, I retrieved diving gear from the local equipment shed and carefully waded in. This side of the island had the larger reef system than those near the popular beach areas, which I explored for the next hour. My only companions were a pair of aquatic drones, which Naomi insisted accompany me at all times while I was underwater. I was making my way slowly back towards the cove inlet when I received an incoming communication request. It was from Jess Kurvestad. He had been the thought therapist who had helped me through the troubled mental aftermath of my self-imposed Mongolian exile. His message request was for verbal interaction only, but I delayed answering and instead had my implant signal that I would call him back shortly when I was finished diving. Once I was safely back on shore and out of my gear, I allowed the connection. "Jess, I'm sorry for the delay in responding, but I was diving alone," I said when we finally connected. "No problem, John. I haven't heard from you in a while and wondered how you're doing," he inquired with his normal, happy and confident voice. "I'm doing just great, Jess. What can I do for you?" "I hear you are headed back to the lunar Farside station tomorrow via wormhole transport," he said. That information was not widely known, and I felt a bit of suspicion join my curiosity over his call. "Currently, that's the plan. Why do you ask?" I answered carefully. "I'd like to have a quick face-to-face meeting with you, John. Would it be possible for you to leave an hour early and meet with me at the transport hub?" There was only one lunar range transport hub currently operational on the Earth, and it was the higher power wormhole facility recently constructed near the equator on the western end of the island of New Guinea. I thought about Jess's request for a moment and decided there was nothing pressing preventing me from doing as he asked. I was scheduled to leave at 10 o'clock. If I departed an hour earlier, that would put me on New Guinea 2 hours after noon local time. I used my implant to verify that the facility had the power reserves and an open time slot to bring me there earlier. It did. "I will meet you at the transport hub at 14 o'clock local time," I replied. "The lunar transfer is scheduled for about an hour after." "Thank you, John. I will arrange a meeting space for our chat." What time will that be?" He paused, most likely consulting his own implant. "That's a few hours after your normal breakfast time, so I'll skip having a meal ready when you arrive." "See you tomorrow," he said and abruptly hung up. He had terminated my end of the contact. I wondered what the scheduled meeting was all about as I returned to my compound. I spent the rest of the morning engaged in wood carving in my workshop located in the clearing between the two main beaches. With the island's normal balmy weather, I usually worked outside under a shade and rain canopy. I'd added a short fence around the perimeter of my work area to limit the distractions caused by the curious guests. The fence was low enough to allow them to still see what I was doing, especially with their iris magnification, but it kept them far enough away to deter casual conversation. The fence also had the side benefit of keeping the occasional stray giant tortoise out of my shop area. The gentle creatures had the annoying tendency to bump into my stool and workbench as they wandered around. Aside from scaring the hell out of me, the nudges also sometimes caused my finely sharpened carving tools to fall to the hard paving. I'd grown used to seeing them wander around out of bounds because my guests often forgot to close the gate leading into the tortoise's grassy meadow compound. We'd attach trackers to each of their shells, and occasionally a mobile unit would shepherd them back to their enclosure before they wandered too far. I was focused on my carving and was working on a blackwood sculpture of the head and naked torso of a woman I hoped shared the likeness of Angelina. I wanted to finish the sculpture and gift it to my friend before I left the island. So far, the work was going well, and I was happy with how the piece was progressing. Stacked around me was an assortment of chunks of exotic wood, which I planned to take with me when I returned to Farside Station. I'd had some shipped there months ago, but those stocks were growing depleted. Though I could substitute extruded machine-printed wood, I still preferred working with the real thing whenever I could. The random imperfections of the real thing simply could not be replicated by a machine. I was focused on the final polishing of Angie's face when I was interrupted. "That's beautiful." I looked up to discover that Serenity had brought me lunch. I checked my chronometer and was surprised to see that it was already an hour past noon. I traded her my work in progress for the plate of food she had brought and let her inspect my work while I munched. "What do you think, good enough?" I asked after swallowing a mouthful of sandwich. She turned the glossy black figure around, caressing its features with her fingertips. "Oh, this is Miss Barraza." "I'm sure she would prefer that you called her Angelina," I said. At least Serenity had recognized the subject of the sculpture as Angie. I relaxed as that was the only key requirement of the piece. "I think this is lovely, Grandpa. She will love it." I finished the lunch and Serenity stuck around watching me work and chatting. She then watched as I finished the carving by engraving my initials, the current date, and a short message on its bottom. When I was done, I set the polished black wood figure on the table for both of us to admire. "Are you still leaving tomorrow?" she finally asked after updating me on her morning activities. "Yes, it's been a great vacation, but I have to get back to work. You've done so well here that I've had little to do but relax." "Thank you for that." She beamed at my praise. I was again reminded of how lucky I was to have found her to run the island. "Remember, don't burn yourself out. If you get tired running the place, let me know and I will come back or we can shut the place down for a while," I added. "I'm still having fun, Grandpa, but I'll remember." I spent the rest of the afternoon and evening relaxing in a soft lounge chair on the rooftop patio. In between naps, I read a story by an old British science fiction writer whose works often included wormholes. I'd been hoping for some insight or two on using them in battle, but so far nothing had come of my research which I thought might be useful against the assemblage. The books did include the idea of using wormhole technology to develop a form of faster-than-light starship travel. I'd have to discuss that possibility with Stellux AI sometime. Maybe it could form a team of AIs and a couple smart, imaginative humans to study and develop the concept. My great-granddaughter joined me again well after dark. We snacked on pizza and spent some time in the rooftop hot tub. Later, when the air had settled and the skies had grown truly dark, I deployed my retro-looking telescope. She had never seen the planets and the moon via the naked eye or without digital enhancement, and loved the views through the old-style optical instruments. The scope was not truly authentic, as it included a state-of-the-art ultra-lightweight 80-centimeter primary mirror on a fully AI-assisted computerized tracking mount. But still, I would have loved to own such a scope back before the reset. Hell, any good university back then would have been proud to possess such an instrument. The next morning, I went to find Angie. I'd left her a message to contact me after she woke up, and she had replied that she was currently between clients, I assume not literally, and was at her quarters in the beach area cottage. She loved my gift of the wood carving and gave me a long hug and a tender kiss after I had presented it to her. We spent the next hour properly saying goodbye to each other. After a quick shower, I had to get going. I left promising to look her up the next time I was on the Earth. I also offered her a place to stay if she somehow found herself in my neighborhood on the far side of the moon. Next, I stopped by the workshop and gathered up some hardwood carving materials, which I'd be taking with me. I messaged Serenity to tell her I was leaving in 10 minutes, but she was tied up solving guest issues. She did offer to set that aside and to come see me off, but I told her not to bother. Hopefully, with lunar travel now trivial, at least for me, I'd see her again in a few months. I went to the middle of the aircraft landing area and messaged the transport hub that I was ready for my pickup. I had to wait a few minutes for the queues to clear before the targeting wormholes formed above me. I spotted them after hearing their formation pops and watched them triangulate my position and scan my surroundings. I jumped when the larger transport wormhole formed almost directly above me. It took a lot of will to remain still as it lowered and stabilized itself to just a few meters distance. I'd heard that many could not handle this part of the new travel routine without bolting. Those who couldn't had to turn their shells over to their augments, at least for the insertion part of the transport. I studied the wormhole aperture. From this angle, I could see the lighting effects caused by the distorted portal itself. The show was over quickly as the bottom of the transport tube appeared in the void and began extruding itself towards the ground directly in front of me. As it neared the surface, the transparent, curved hatch on the cylinder rotated open. I quickly stepped inside, twisting a bit to fit my large sack of hardwood in the tight chamber. The hatch closed, and there was a slight pause as the instruments built into the base of the cylinder verified the mass of my body and that of my wooden cargo. The momentum compensation machinery at the other end of the wormhole needed accurate measurements to properly balance my transfer. I looked up and watched through the top vision window as the umbilical connecting the transport cylinder to the still active wormhole aperture began retracting. Now came the part I hated. As I felt myself rise from the ground, the inflation bladders lining the inside of the tube quickly swelled, locking me tightly in position. I needed the restraints as the moment I passed through the wormhole and emerged at the transport hub in Western New Guinea, down would likely be in some other direction from where my feet were currently pointed. This was because the wormhole generator machinery at the transport hub was currently orientated to match the spatial momentum and direction vector of my island. With heels in the sand located in the western Indian Ocean and New Guinea in the western Pacific, this meant that there was over 80 degrees of longitude separating both locations. With the rotation of the Earth, the 2 points were traveling through space at almost right angles to each other. That meant that I'd arrive in New Guinea lying almost on my back, and the inflated bladders would keep me from being injured during the instant change in gravity. At least it would be better than when I had arrived on the Earth after leaving Luna. That time I'd come back to the Earth, standing on my head and under a full G of gravity, 5 times more than I'd experienced on the Moon before I left. I passed through the wormhole and was instantly almost a quarter of the way around the Earth. I closed my eyes tightly when I felt the sudden nausea caused by the instant change in my orientation. That moment occurred when the gods of physics decided that I was no longer there and was now here. Why it was perceived instantly by living nervous systems and not as a wave passing through our bodies was a mystery which the wormhole researchers were still working to fully understand. When I felt my weight firmly on my back instead of my feet, and when my nausea had died down enough, I opened my eyes. I saw that the transport cylinder was now in the enormous, brightly lit hemispherical enclosure of the Earth's first operational lunar range transfer hub. As the umbilical slowly pulled me away from the ultra-complex entwined toroid majesty of the main wormhole generator, it also reoriented the cylinder so my feet were again pointed down. The restraint bladders deflated and I was no longer squeezed inside the tube. I was now able to look around at the transfer hub. Behind me, the complex spatial compensating apparatus began rotating on its gimbals to match the required vector for the next wormhole terminus point. There were still many visible heat shimmers radiating from the superconducting conduit coolant loops as they re-chilled after their recent high-energy transfers. I could hear the hiss as coolant was circulated to rid the equipment of the excessive heat caused by the rapid energy expenditure. There were even wisps of vapor and smoke drifting around the machinery. Perhaps ozone or a coolant leak? I looked up and spotted huge circulation fans drawing the vapors out of the chamber. I was glad the transport cylinder was sealed, as the environment of the chamber was likely unhealthy. Below the chamber's floor, I imagined the ultracapacitors charging up with the gigawatts of energy needed to punch the next hole through space and to spin up the compensating exotic matter to match the spatial motion vectors with the next target location. Unfortunately, there were no wildly flashing lights or lightning bolt electrical discharges illuminating the machinery I was observing. Nothing to celebrate the amazing feats of engineering and physics which were occurring before my very eyes. Leaving the wizardry of the wormhole generator behind, I turned and saw that my transport cylinder was being shunted towards one of the arrival and departure airlocks, ringing the huge chamber. Moments later, the cylinder passed through a quick-acting door seal and was deposited inside the lock, the delivery umbilical detaching and retreating before the lock sealed behind it. A chime sounded in the cylinder, and a voice spoke. "Welcome to New Guinea, John Abrams Prime. I am Iolus, the Transport Control AI. You are now in Airlock 6, and you may leave your wooden cargo in the adjacent alcove during your stay at the station. Your departure window to Luna is scheduled for 73 minutes from now. Please return to this airlock no later than 71 minutes from now." I thanked the AI and waited for the airlock to cycle and the transport cylinder hatch to open. Despite being purged, the air inside the receiving lock still had traces of the cocktail of gases from the wormhole chamber behind. They were not quite strong enough to make my eyes water, but I was glad they were being drawn away quickly. The room's outer airlock door opened and I saw a smiling woman waiting for me in the alcove beyond. I grinned back when I recognized my former stalker, and more recently, my biographer, Adele Sol Chilean. Adele! I thought I'd be meeting Jess today? Not that I am unhappy to see you, I said. He's here, she said as she stepped forward and gave me a quick hug. He's off looking for a suitable space to have your meeting. He just sent me a direction trace. Shall we go meet him? As Iola's AI had instructed, I deposited my sack of carving wood in one of the many storage lockers and followed Adele out of the alcove. Beyond was a wide, curving corridor that appeared to circle around the outer perimeter of the transport megastructure. I immediately noticed that the corridor's outside wall was perforated with periodic, huge oval windows. I stepped up to the closest and took in the splendor of the New Guinea landscape. The fake arcology in which this wormhole facility had been constructed was located on the southern edge of the central mountain range, running east and west, which bisected the large island. My implant's compass indicated I was currently facing roughly southerly, and we were high enough that I was just able to see the Pacific Ocean 60 kilometers away. Below the window, closer to the station, was a vast expanse of emerald green rainforest. The dense canopy was dotted with slowly drifting, darker green blotches, which were the shadows of the partly cloudy sky. This island clearly received more rainfall than heels in the sand, and I hoped there would be an opportunity to step outside and look around before I was sent off to the moon. Despite the fertile forest covering most of the scene, there was also plenty of modern infrastructure visible. The main examples were the 5 wide, clear-cut paths weaving through the jungle leading to this facility. Centered on each clearing was a large superconducting energy transfer conduit. The pipeline-like conduits were mounted on regular raised supports, which elevated them above the jungle floor. Each support had tall, heat-exchanging radiators, which kept the conduits thermally stable. It struck me that the power conduits and their mounts looked familiar, as they resembled a crude oil pipeline that had been built to cross Alaska in my youth. The similarities were eerie, including the same regular expansion-controlling zigzag routing of the conduits. I spent a moment tracing the paths of each power line as they extended away from the facility. One ended just 10 kilometers away at a large clearing, which contained the recognizable outline of a large fusion power generating facility. Another conduit wove its way to the distant southern coast, possibly leading to an offshore tidal generation plant or some distant underwater geothermal source. The remaining power supply lines faded off to the jungle's horizons towards the east and west. It was clear from the display in front of me that this facility required an enormous amount of power. But when compared to that needed to see me all the way from the Earth to the moon using rockets, maybe the energy expense was worth it. When I finished marveling at the view, I noticed Adele studying me. Her smile was just a bit too tight, and I felt something was bothering her. She motioned towards the curving corridor to our right, and we began walking again. I noticed movement behind us and turned to see a quadruped mobile unit following along behind, shadowing us. The station clearly had higher security in place than was typical. "How's the documentary coming along?" I asked, hoping to get her talking and possibly reveal what is bothering her. "Good. We finished the first draft and are now working on the final editing." She had finished writing my biography a year earlier, to some acclaim it turned out. Apparently there had been enough interest in my recent activities that she now had the backing needed to develop it further into a full virtuality simulation. Despite periodic prodding from Adele, I'd so far avoided having to fully read the completed biography. I shuddered at the thought of now having to relive my own life and times in full virtual. Ugh. "Guess who we commissioned to do the motion capture and translation of you into full virtual?" she asked. At my shrug, she continued, "Chelsea, Iberia. She was looking for a new project after finishing her Sioux Indian historical simulation and jumped at the chance to roleplay you. She has been busy working in the translation matrix for the past 3 weeks." "Good for her," I replied before adding, "I like Chelsea, so I hope this project increases her following instead of doing the opposite and ending her career." I had said that last in a half-joking manner. Chelsea had a great personality, and I doubted that an occasional flop would slow her down. I wondered about the details of the project and asked, "Where are you producing the virtuality? We have constructed a small studio in New Ulaanbaatar. We are actually using live imaging for some of the virtualization and wanted to be as close to the area where you spent your recent decades as possible, she replied. As I had hoped, the excitement of discussing her project was causing her to become more animated. There is only a half dozen of us working on location in Mongolia, though. The rest of the team are spread around the planet, working from their facilities. We arrived at a wider juncture in the corridor. The larger space contained a bank of elevators, and one opened as we approached. I entered and stood beside Adele, and thankfully the security unit remained outside when the door slid closed. I looked at my companion and noticed her expression had regained the slightly nervous and forced smile from earlier. "Why are you here, Adele?" "Not that I don't enjoy seeing you or catching up with your activities," I asked, deciding to confront her unease head-on. After a pause, she said, "I am being paid to consult about you. It seems I am something of a contemporary expert on the subject of John Abrams Prime these days." I wondered why Jess would go to all the trouble to hire a consultant. I had heard little from him since our counseling time together after I'd come back from my nomadic wandering. If he was curious about my recent activities, why did he not arrange to spend time with me and learn about them directly? "Why is Jess so interested?" I asked. "I don't know all the details, but I think Jess was also hired by someone else. I'm not sure who is responsible, though. You'll have to ask Jess," she said dismissively. I could tell the topic was upsetting her, so I kept further questions to myself. Adele went on, "But I will say the pay is good. It was even arranged that I be transported here by wormhole, which was the first time I've traveled that way. Even with the recent windfall of scud I received from publishing your biography, I could never have afforded such an extravagance on my own. The high power requirements of the new method of transport were a limiting factor, and access to it was likely to remain limited. To help reduce casual usage, the AI Advisory Council had imposed steep fees for non-critical usage. The high fees worked to reduce demand while still allowing those with the means to use the method. This outlet also had the side benefit of acting as a revenue sink. Not to mention that the scut went to the Forbin 3, mainly myself, Oxa, and Rami. A few seconds later, the rear lift door behind us opened. We were now much higher in the building. Ahead was a large, high-ceilinged room filled with comfortable-looking furniture. Off to one side was a dining area, complete with a large auto kitchen. The far curving wall was a huge window with sliding glass doors leading to what looked like an outdoor terrace. I spotted 6 other humans currently in the room. All were seated in separate areas, and each had the trance-like look of someone off in virtual. 2 were methodically eating under the control of their augments, and it occurred to me that this space was a break room or relaxation area of some sort. I scanned each occupant quickly, but none of them looked like the Jess I had known. Had he changed shells? I looked to my companion questioningly. Adele pointed to the outdoor terrace. "Jess is outside. Go ahead and join him while I get us some refreshments from the auto kitchen. Would you like coffee?" "Tea, Earl Grey, please," I said. My stomach rumbled at the thought of snacks. I remembered that I'd skipped breakfast this morning because of my proper goodbye to Angie. Could you have the replicator make me a breakfast croissant or something?" "I skipped breakfast," I asked with a sympathetic pout. She nodded and went off to prepare the food and drinks. I headed to the exit leading to the terrace, eager to get some answers as to why I had been summoned here. Outside, I saw 2 people seated at a table towards the far side of the terrace near the outer railing. I recognized the taller of the 2 humans as my old confidant, Jess Kurvestad. He'd noticed my arrival and waved me over. His companion was currently facing away and did not react to his actions and was likely off in virtual. Jess watched me as I approached their table, but I caught him also glancing occasionally at 2 other figures lingering nearby. I'd missed these up until now as they were keeping to the edges of the terrace, one on each side of Jess's table. The new figures were not human and were instead a pair of identical, generic-looking utility androids. I compared the similar units and noted that the asexual-looking biped figures lacked the flair of my longtime android companion, Omu. The 2 androids were currently passive and immobile and were kneeling in a waiting position about half a dozen meters away. I sensed that they were there to perform some security function. Jess's companion must have either been important or was paranoid enough to have his or her own security. I'd seen such an arrangement before, but it was uncommon and I greatly preferred my unseen security apparatus, which Naomi handled for me. As I crossed the terrace, I noted it was much cooler outside than I had expected it to be. I spotted the large grills lining both sides of the area, which were discharging conditioned air to keep the area dry and comfortable. There were also suspended shades overhead which protected much of the terrace from the heat of the near equatorial sun. Jess stood as I reached their table. He extended his hand and I shook it. "Mr. Kurvistad," I said politely. "There is no need to be so formal, John. Please stick with just Jess," he said with a smile. "Thank you for taking the time to meet today." He gestured to his table-mate. "Joining us is Terkarn Conlon." I noticed his tight expression as he announced his companion. I recognized Monsieur Karn Conlon. She was a director, although I could not remember precisely of what area or division. At least I remembered that she was a Herm. I double-checked the visible blue designation glyph tattoo on her right wrist, just in case she had changed her preferences since the last time I had met her. Yes, she still preferred the female designation. Before I could sit down, the hermaphrodite came out of virtual and fluidly stood. I noticed the two androids waiting on our fringes stood with her, mirroring her motions. She mostly ignored their actions, but I did catch her eyes flicker to each of them briefly. She recovered with a smile and moved to shake my hand. "John, I'm pleased to meet you again," she said smoothly, with the practiced air of a politician. I also noticed her mannerisms were those of someone used to wielding power. I sighed internally. It looked like humans were once again classifying themselves. As much as I hoped to avoid it, nature seemed to find a way. "Monsieur Karn Conlon," I said neutrally, as I shook her hand. I noted that she had a firm grip. "Please call me Ter. I trust you are doing well." "It's been a number of decades since we last spoke," the director said. I didn't remember our last meeting. Of course, as with all directors, she was likely very old and had been in many shells since it had been born. To become a director meant devoting 5 decades of your life to public service. Also, most who made the decision to try for a directorship did so only after having already lived a full lifespan. The director went on, "I apologize on behalf of Jess for not informing you of my presence. He was not aware that I would be attending this meeting with him. I think he's a bit miffed at me at the moment," Tara said, glancing at the taller man. Jess made motions as if dismissing the notion, but I noticed his tense expression remained. He was clearly upset despite his denial. Adele broke the awkward moment by approaching with a tray of beverages and snacks. We all sat and divided the tray's contents. I took the cup of tea and my breakfast sandwich while Jess refilled his and Tara's coffee from a carafe that Adele had also brought. My former biographer had taken the fourth seat and looked to be joining us for the upcoming discussion. We chatted about mundane things while I finished my late breakfast. The hermaphrodite director mostly watched as Adele, Jess, and I chatted about past events. After 5 minutes, the director set her now empty cup down, which signaled that the discussion was about to begin in earnest. "John, I have been selected as the initial contact person, so to speak, for a group of directors who have grown increasingly concerned about recent changes in your behavior," the director said hesitantly, almost carefully, as if unsure of how her words would be received. She then gestured towards our table companions. "I have been meeting with Mr. Kurvistad and Miss Chilean for much of the morning, discussing your past actions and your recent changes." I kept my eyes on her while she spoke, but saw in my peripheral vision that Jess and Adele were looking down at their hands as if uncomfortable. The director then paused, clearly wanting me to respond in some manner to her admission. As I thought about her statement and my response, I decided to ask my AI for more information before I gave anything away. "Naomi, what's going on? And who is this group of directors she mentioned?" I sub-vocalized. "Over the past 8 months, I have monitored 5 face-to-face meetings between certain directors. I have extrapolated from certain patterns that the group to which Monsieur Karn Conlon is referring contains 7 directors. All members of this group have made various inquiries to the AI Advisory Council over the recent decades about the authority you exert over the AIs. From this, I deduce that they are fully aware of both my ability to override the other AIs and your ability to mandate my actions. This group is growing concerned that you have begun to more openly wield this power." Ah, I had a feeling something like this was brewing. I sat back and smiled at the director. Are you and your friends becoming afraid of me, Tara? I asked. I then gestured to the two watching androids. Is that why you brought the androids? Tara considered the two watching androids while Adele and Jess looked at each other with surprise. Interesting, she said. I didn't bring the units, John. Neither did Jess or Adele. If I had to guess, I would say that they are here for your protection, not ours. At my surprised expression, the android to our left rose and approached our table. You are correct, Monsieur Karn Conlon, it said in a neutral, synthesized voice. We are here to ensure that no harm befalls John Abrams. Please understand that he is generally kept uninformed of the various security measures which surround him, and did not have any foreknowledge of the additional security actions undertaken today. Explanation made, the android returned to its previous waiting location and resumed its kneeling position. Despite my surprise upon hearing the android's statement, I managed to keep my expression neutral, mostly. The hermaphrodite continued as if the android had not interrupted. As I was saying, I've spoken with Jess and Adele for most of the morning. The topic of our discussion has been your past actions and your current mental state. You should be happy to know that both maintain that you have not lost your mind, so to speak. Jess coughed upon hearing that. Adele looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. A part of me was bothered that I was the subject of the director's concern, although I could certainly understand the reasoning behind it. Another part of me was pissed off by their prying. My innate orneriness allowed that part to gain temporary control of my mouth. I'm glad to hear that, I said sarcastically. So what would have been the plan if they'd reported that I was out of my mind? The director surprised me by chuckling. Well, I would certainly have refused to be the sacrificial lamb for this meeting if that had been the case. Her comment diffused my anger enough that my more rational side regained control. Why the sudden concern? I've pushed through only a few changes without consulting the council or the directors. None of them has had much effect on the various departments under director control. You've unilaterally acted to change the mind data recording frequency of our children, John. After extensive discussions with the AIs, we now understand why. In addition, you've taken steps to eradicate the belief system of a small portion of our society, again without consulting the AI Council or the directorship. Although most agree with your actions and find the beliefs you've restricted misguided and disturbing, you have to agree that your actions are unprecedented, Tara explained. It needed to be done, I said simply. That may be true, the director agreed, but we'd have liked to have been more involved with those decisions. There are better ways for changes like that to be made. None that would have worked as quickly, I replied. Tara shrugged as if conceding the point. She went on to her second argument. We observed and studied your actions during your publicity tour, for lack of a better description, before the Second Global Forum. That was a lot of effort on your part to shift humanity towards voting to attack our enemy as soon as possible. She paused and I didn't respond. After it became apparent that I was going to not comment, she went on, Tell me, John, what would you have done if humanity had voted to continue studying the problem instead of attacking? I struggled to keep any smugness off my face as I replied, Luckily, we won't have to find out, I said simply. Would you indulge us and speculate, simply for curiosity's sake? She asked. I had to hand it to her for daring to ask that. I remained silent as I thought about how to respond. On the one hand, the less they knew of my plans, the less pike on which I could be impaled. On the other hand, they had to suspect what I would have done. Maybe being honest about my intentions would help by removing doubts of my resolve. The group would either have to accept my actions and my authority or remain suspicious and doubtful. I decided to gamble on their rationality and acceptance of the situation. If humanity had voted not to attack the assemblage, I would have forced the AIs to arrange things so that the vote was soon reversed. While that took place, I would have continued with the preparations for such an attack through other channels. In the end, it was calculated that I could achieve the same result by utilizing the bully pulpit of my popularity. The AI had run extensive simulations of the effects of my publicity tour to shift public opinion. It turns out that they were correct. The three seemed a bit surprised that I freely admitted my intentions. I noted the various emotions on display. Terry was best at keeping control of her expressions, but I noted concern. Jess let a bit of fear slip through. Adele seemed the least worried of the three, and I even caught what looked like a hint of pride or adoration. "Tell me, Jon," Tara began, "how did the assassination attempt make you feel? Did it make the overt use of your authority easier?" The raw emotions I had felt at the time again rose inside me before I tamped them back down. I think I managed to keep my outward appearance from revealing the brief moment of hurt and anger I had felt. I took a deep breath to calm myself further. "It was a wake-up call. You're probably worried that I felt outraged. I admit I did, but I also felt concerned that anyone would make such an attempt. The concern led to a great deal of soul-searching over my actions. To this day, I use the memories of that to help regulate my impulses. You will notice that I've stayed mostly hands-off, other than in the two incidents you've mentioned, since that event." "We've noticed, she admitted. "Still, I and the other directors in my group are worried about what comes next. What changes will you inflict upon the world that we all live in, and how will we be forced to deal with your impulses?" "Are you worried about sharing your power with me?" I asked the director bluntly. "Only to the extent that, unlike you, Jon, I and the other directors have achieved our power by being elected by our fellow humans. Doesn't it bother you that you wield almost absolute power without such a mandate?" I didn't react as I considered the director's bold question. Adele and Jess were clearly apprehensive by the turn the conversation was taking, and both were staring at the table, avoiding both of us. At least Tara maintained my gaze as she waited for my response. I better understood why she had earned her directorship. I considered her statement in question. It was something which I had actually pondered often over the nearly 2 centuries. I had secretly wielded absolute power. The conclusions I had reached early on remain valid today. "Monsieur Carn Conlon, you are mistaken. I do have a mandate from humanity to lead." I spoke softly but firmly. The mandate was voted on and passed unanimously. In addition, well before that vote was taken, I had been nominated solely for the role by the one human who had possessed full knowledge of the ramifications that granting me such authority would cause. She frowned upon hearing this, clearly puzzled. Adele and Jess were curious enough to stop staring at the table and to look at me again, waiting for my explanation. 513 years ago, in the year 2602, I was nominated to receive my authority by a human female named Anna Branco. At the time, she and I were the only 2 living humans active on this world. We met in Central America and an accommodation was made. During the events of our meeting, she gave up her own chances for power and instead chose to place me on the path to gain ultimate authority over this planet. As you might guess from your schooling in history, this was by giving me the tools to enable me to take power. The tools were the hidden knowledge of the assemblage being responsible for humanity's destruction and the Hemru module which could override the enemy's control. I paused to let them absorb that. They didn't interrupt with any questions, so I went on. 328 years later, in the year 2930, that decision and authority was confirmed by the majority vote of the current relevant human population in existence at that time. The call to vote was made by my second daughter, Abby Abrams Branco, who implored that I should wield my authority and rule over this world. Of course, to remain impartial, I abstained from that vote. Luckily, there was a third human in existence to break the impasse. Uxe Esperanza, the only other mentally qualified human alive at that time, voted in agreement with Abby Branco, and thus I was elected to rule. Note that by qualified, I mean all adult humans, except the human Amazonia tribal population. That group had already been granted limited autonomy over their region, which prevented their consideration for other, more global matters. My statements were met by a stunned silence. After waiting a moment, I went on. "I believe Miss Esperanza can currently be reached at the Phobos Military Wormhole Research Complex if you wish to validate my claims and to confirm her vote. Unfortunately, my daughter Abby is unavailable at present as she chose to no longer remain among the living." Before they could reply, I added, "Although if you are determined to validate my claims, digital copies of her memories do exist on board the interstellar colonizer vessels Averill, currently en route to Tau Ceti, and aboard the Sovrana, currently en route to Achird. You will have to wait for their arrival at either location, though, so any confirmation will be delayed a few centuries. Tara's expression took on the distracted look of someone who was currently in a virtuality, so it was Jess who broke the silence. That's an incredible claim, Jon, and I believe you. But don't you worry that such a mandate is no longer relevant? He asked. After all, there are now almost 3 million humans living in the system you say you have authority over. I consider the vote in the mandate still fully relevant, I replied simply. Terry rejoined us. I have consulted with UDEX. The legal grounds behind your claim are firm, and the AI agrees with your interpretation. Although, due to your control of the AI mentality, I retain some suspicions over its conclusions. I shrugged. If I were in her position, I'd be suspicious as well. Regardless, I possess the authority, and any legal qualms over its origins are frankly pointless at this time, mainly because of that very same authority, I stated. The director gave me a slow nod, conceding the point. There followed a long and awkward silence. Adele and Jess refilled their coffee, while Ter just sat studying me. She finally broke the silence and struck deeply with her next question. Jon, back when the directorships were formed, why did you require firm term limits for anyone holding the positions? You know exactly why, I replied with a bit of anger, knowing where the director was heading with her question. And I have thought on that matter deeply. Am I corrupted? Absolutely. I don't think so. Yet. I know it can and likely will happen, though. I do plan at some point to give up some or most of my authority, at least in this system, but not just yet. That is easy for you to say, especially given your position. Terry replied before adding, if you see the need to relinquish your power eventually, why wait? She was relentless. I realized she was just doing her job and calmed myself. I will do nothing of the sort until the threat of the assemblage is eliminated. Consider the retention of my authority as a form of emergency war powers. But, Tara began. No buts, I interrupted loudly. Tara stopped talking and the others looked at me shocked. I think our discussion of the subject is over. Until the threat of the assemblage is removed, my decision is final, and frankly, there is nothing you can do about it, so you will just have to deal with it. I paused to let that sink in. Thankfully, they were wise enough to let the matter rest. Was there anything else you'd like to discuss? I asked, after calming myself. There was another long, awkward silence. It was broken when the director stood. I understand, Jon. I will depart so you can spend your remaining time here talking with your friends. I leave with one request. Please be more proactive in informing the directors when you choose to wield your authority. It may help soothe tensions caused by those instances. I stood as well and shook the director's hand. I agree. It was never my intention to mislead anyone. I should have informed you of my actions sooner. I understand bringing this to my attention must have been difficult for you and the other directors, and I sympathize with your plight. I won't ask you to trust me, but know that I will consider the ramification of my actions and how it affects the directors as well as humanity in general. She nodded and left the outdoor terrace. One of the androids followed it out, and I realized that Naomi's security actions would probably make my request for trust less likely to be granted. There was no turning back now, though. Jess, Adele, and I enjoyed a nice chat for the next quarter hour. I laughed when Jess finally broke down and had to ask how I was feeling. He simply could not help himself, and after his third, not too subtle attempt at probing my mental state, even Adele laughed at my expression. Jess laughed as well, realizing that maybe he was trying a bit too hard. As my lunar departure time approached, we had agreed to continue to occasionally chat via virtual. I realized that helping him to understand my state of mind would go a long way to placating the worries of the ruling directorate. Jess let Adele walk me alone back to the receiving and departure area. When we arrived back at the airlock I'd arrived at, we spent the few minutes remaining before I left just holding each other. I felt myself tear up a bit when she whispered into my ear, just before we parted, that she trusted me. Soon I was watching her through the transparent hatch cover of the transport cylinder as she waved goodbye to me. I think both of our eyes were shining more than just a little as the transport machinery pulled me away from the airlock and towards the just-formed wormhole portal leading to the far side of the moon.